So what are we doing today?
Same thing we do every day, Lance. Try to take over the vinyl world.
Tranquilo. Shine.
We're starting to do some of these like top lists or whatever. I don't even want to call them lists, top lists anyway. They're not top 10 lists. I'm calling this a list of funk albums that influence my life. Not only do they influence my life, but they influence kind of how I collect, and they influence kind of how I approach what I look for when I'm digging. And it's really been kind of an interesting story.
Well, I love this kind of content because, you know, when you're out there looking for records, you kind of get the obvious stuff, but then you're like, well, what else do I get? And when you look at a list of records like this and you see the album covers, and then you're out digging, you flip through and you're like, oh, I remember them talking about this record. Maybe I'll give this a try. So I think the visual aspect of it and just learning about new music and different music is really valuable to the vinyl community.
And we got a little bit of flack online about the classic rock list that we put out, saying we were kind of like telling people what to listen to. I think that we'll take a step back and sort of how we approach these, in the sense that these are not must-have records, but just records that have influenced me and what Lance, and what we listen to, and kind of the things that we're into. So just to give you a little bit of this sort of origin story, I think when we talk to people that sort of meet us in the vinyl herd, or they meet us out, doing whatever it is that we're out doing, spinning records or whatever.
Oh, how did you get into all of
I
this?
kind of tell this origin story often where, I had started collecting, and I was really enjoying the process of becoming a collector.
Sure.
and sort of accumulating records. And in really short succession, I had a television show that I was producing, and that kind of got put on the back burner, got put on hiatus during COVID. And within like short succession of me losing my TV show, about 2 weeks later, there was a post on Facebook Marketplace literally giving away 2,000 records.
Wow, 2,000 records.
2,000 records in Sterling, Colorado. So the ad had been up for about 8 minutes. And I saw it, and I immediately responded to the woman. I said, hey, I have a van. I'm on my way. Truth be told, I don't have a van. I never had a van. I had 2 Honda CRVs, which we felt like was a van equal to a van. So we loaded up the kid, and we loaded up the 2 cars, and we drove out to Sterling, Colorado, about a 2-hour drive each way. And we started to load up these records. And there was, like I said, there was about 2,000 records. We got about 1,200 in the 2 CRVs before they were both like just dragging down to the ground. And I told the woman, you have to let me come back tomorrow. And she said, of course.
Wow.
And so there was really interesting things about this collection. First of all, it was an education, right? It's
Right.
a huge education.
2,000 records.
You have 2,000 records. Every record is a lesson. And you start digging, you know what I mean? And there was some obvious chaff. I think I ended up selling like 400 or 500 records of chaff as a bulk deal at the very end of it. But there were all these pockets of awesome. And it was obvious that they were resellers too. And they had gone through and picked out the Beatles and picked out the Led Zeppelin. And
So the real high-end stuff.
Sort of the high-end.
Obviously missing.
Is sort of missing, right? There was only a few Pink Floyd records in there. And a collection of 2,000. There'd more than just 2 Pink Floyd records or whatever. So anyway, that was obvious. But what was left were these sort of pockets of psych rock, these pockets of funk and soul. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today,
Right.
is this sort of collection. In that collection of funk and soul records, there was about 150 records. They were obviously buyers, so God knows who had this collection at one point. But this was all part of sort of a thread that was in this larger batch of 2,000 records. And you start digging through it, and you start seeing covers that look like this. And this is the first record I'll talk about in this list of influential funk records that I've collected. I just started putting them aside because I didn't really know what they were when I first got into this.
Yeah, this looks interesting.
Let's
Let's
put this over aside. So there's a lot of classic soul stuff in there, some Obi Wright, and we'll do another soul list too. But there was these sort of amazing funk records that I'd never really heard of. And we'll start with Eddie Hazel, Games, Dames, and Guitar Things. This record, just looking at the cover, you're just like, my God, what is going on there? And for people that don't know, Eddie Hazel was the lead guitarist on the early days of Funkadelic. And he had some personal troubles, which caused him to sort of step back from the band. But he never left the P-Funk family. He continued to collaborate with those guys and would rarely lend his guitar work to those albums, those later P-Funk and Funkadelic albums. But he would work as a producer, and he did actually play on some of them. This is his first and only solo record that was released during his lifetime. Games, Dames, and Guitar Things basically is just an amazing... Like, take the guitar solo from Maggot Brain and then distill it into a record. And we're going to get to that too. But it's just an awesome record. He actually recruited different members of the Funkadelic family to help him record this in 1977, and then they put this out. He transforms classic rock standards like the Beatles' "I Want You, She's So Heavy," and the Mamas and the Papas' "California Dreaming" into literally unrecognizable funk tunes, right? Like, they're like, you put them side by side to the originals, and it's almost unrecognizable the way that he transforms them with his sort of musical approach.
Yeah, I remember when you played that "She's So Heavy" for me, I was like, oh, this is really good. I'm like, wait,
it's a Beatles song.
I know this.
Yeah, it's a Beatles song. I will mention, too, because we want to get through this list without it taking too long, that they have started repressing this record. And although this is an original pressing that was in that first collection that I got, Newberry has a blue version of it. Zia did an orange splatter version of it that's just fantastic. So I'm glad to see this. I've seen it with, Obi Wright, who I've already mentioned, Eddie Hazel. Some of these more obscure funk and soul artists, Tyrone Davis, all these other sort of some obscure, like, albums that are on some of these different labels like Dakar and like some of these more obscure labels are starting to get repressed, and it's fantastic. So if you see this repress of Eddie Hazel or an original pressing, if you can, snag it up, okay? We're gonna go through these as quickly as possible, but they've all been pretty highly influential for me. This one is one that I think a lot of people would have in their collection. Super interesting album. It's a soundtrack for the film Superfly, put out by Curtis Mayfield. He produced the music that was on it. It's got that interesting die cut cover that is usually this part is usually ripped off,
which is how mine is.
Yeah, it's just this part just gets ripped off, and that's all there is to it. But this is a critical indictment and a seminal funk and soul album by Curtis Mayfield, who gained instant notoriety after its release in 1972. Songs like Pusher Man and Freddy's Dead were crucial to the development of the funk sound overall. I mean, this is 1972. This is an early album in sort of this movement, if you will, that progressed from the early to late 70s, and beyond once you get into the techno funk. But we'll get to that too. So it's one of the few soundtracks that actually outgrossed the film that it accompanies.
Yeah.
So I mean, it makes a lot of sense. If you're out digging, you will find this record. It's available, and it's just great. Just nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, I think they did a Mofadeli Sound Lab.
A Mo-Fi version of this
one, yeah.
Shit, I'm going to spend more money. All right, moving on. Again, these are funk records that most of these were found in that original collection, and I just found them to be just kind of just change my perspective about what I want to listen to when I'm throwing a record on.
Yeah, this stuff's just good. Because I know we've done vinyl spin nights where we play this stuff, and just every track is just... This is just good.
It's just good. It's good to listen to. It's enjoyable. The production quality is fantastic. You can kind of see where some of like the Doobie Brothers were ripping off some of these riffs and shit like that. Sorry, Doobie Brothers. I mean, get your shit together. But anyway, Brothers Johnson, Right on Time. This album was originally panned by critics as kind of bland and like uninspired, but it has since been elevated as a seamless mix of both pop and funk. Like I said, Quincy Jones produced this album. It's actually a work of art in its song choice and overall approach. Released in 1977, it features the Brothers Johnson's take on Shuggie Otis's Strawberry Letter 23. I actually love that version. I love Shuggie Otis's version. Again, study up on Shuggie Otis. He's another amazing guitarist that is often overlooked. And then there's a really amazing instrumental funk tune called Q on this record that is also worth your time.
Is this the one you gave me? Or is it?
I believe I gave you a copy of this one.
Because I know I have one of these.
There's another one that has a blue cover with both of them on the front of it that has come together on it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, like Bland is, when I think of this, Bland is not what comes to mind to me.
In 1977, disco is sort of like taken over. It's like this wave that's coming up.
Sure.
And this was sometimes seen as trying to bridge the gap between pop and disco and funk. And in that sense, they felt like this particular critic from Rolling Stone felt like it missed the mark. But people that have spent time with this record and sort of let it breathe and live on its own realize that it's actually pretty fucking amazing. So
what do we got next?
Graham Central Station, from the mind of Larry Graham. I got notes on here. See, I used to, when I first started collecting these, I didn't know like we were spinning these records, I would play, oh yeah, we've been waiting into Ain't No Fun, and you got like those. That's what I'm gonna play when I spin the record at the brewery or whatever. But Graham Central Station, this is their self-titled record. Larry Graham cut his teeth as the bassist for Sly and the Family Stone.
Wow.
He's known as an innovator of the slap bass. In fact, you've talked to people like Victor Wooten and some of the other people that are really known for their slap style. They credit Larry Graham as the innovator of that.
Okay, so he played bass on this and sang?
He plays bass. Why you ask me fucking questions? No, he actually the story of this is that he actually was starting to work with a band called Hot Chocolate. You ever remember me playing that song? Yeah. Everyone's a Winner and all that. They're a fantastic band too. Check out fucking Hot Chocolate. Like they are funky. But Larry Graham started working with those guys, and then he just absorbed them and made this band. Like he's like, no. Let's do this other thing. And Hot Chocolate continued to put out their own records, but they also worked on the personnel worked on this record. And so this became Graham Central Station. And it's just like, it really helped to shape the bass sound of funk. And he has a bunch of records out. This is just their first self-titled, and they're good. Larry Graham, when you get into like the 80s, gets a little bit more love songy, a little more soul, a little slower or whatever. But this stuff from the 70s hits hard.
It's funky.
It's funky. Here's a record. If you've ever been to one of my spins, you've heard me play. This is Jimmy Castor Bunch, E-Man Grooving. E-Man Grooving, the title track is, it's just an awesome song, first of all. Just stream it right now. Just go stream it. But he had a prolific career. He started off as a doo-wop singer, like in the late 50s, early 60s, and then you get into like the 70s, and he starts putting out these like crazy funk records. And this is one of those. Super funky title track, Made for the Dance Floor. There's also a Funky Dracula song on this it's a Funky Dracula tune. That's just hilarious. And there's an amazing version of a Spinners classic, I Don't Want to Lose You. All highlights on this album and worth checking out. I mean, I can play this whole record from start to finish. I mean, Jimmy Castor is another guy that just...
And look at that cover. You can't go wrong.
Oh, dude. I mean, look at this dude. That's E-Man right there. That's a man you can trust right there. He'll take your dog out. He's a good dude. You know, he's a good guy. Good guy enough. All right. Slave, self-titled. Slave is an Ohio-based band formed by Steve Washington and Floyd Miller in 1974. This record came out about 3 years later, and it pioneered the use of electric trumpet and an overall a very progressive funk sound in the scene of funk. I mean, obviously, with a name of your band, Slave, you're going to get some attention, critically from people. So I think that they had a message and they kind of stuck to what they were trying to say. A lot of these bands were very progressive in their politics. When you're talking about Curtis Mayfield and Isaac Hayes and bands like Slave, sure, they had a deeper message and that a lot of it was embedded in civil rights movement and things that were coming out of that, because they're trying to reach a wider audience with a message of equality and a message of, standing up for oneself, sure, to a certain extent.
Yeah.
I heard this record and it was like a door opening. I swear it was like, the funk is deep, it's dark, it's intricate, and it's progressive, and it's something that you don't come across when you're just flipping through the average white band records and shit like that. I mean, there's a deeper level to funk that was much more progressive, and I think that's what stuck with me throughout all these records. Moving on to the Ohio Players, arguably their best record, although there's some of the comps like Gold and stuff that have been put out is fantastic. But Ohio Players, known for super sexy covers. But honestly, the real hot stuff is the funk on the record. This cover features Esther Cordeaux and won a Grammy Award for Best Cover Art.
Wow!
And it's hot. It's a hot album. Hot album cover. But enough about that. Honey is the Ohio Players' 7th album and widely regarded as their best. It peaked at number 2 on the Billboard 200, not the R&B, the mainstream Billboard charts. In 1975, was kept out of the top spot by Jefferson Starship's Red Octopus. Fuck you, Jefferson Starship. Thanks a lot, buddy. Sorry. We'll cut that out. No, we won't. Fuck you, Paul Kantner. Get your shit together. No, I'm kidding. That's good stuff too, which is different. But it was definitely kept out of that top spot. I think this would have been a number one record had it not been for the release of that super popular record. All right, moving on. So, you want to talk about
Here we go.
this overall? People don't really understand that the world of Parliament or Funkadelic or P-Funk or P-Funk All-Star, what is all this, right? And really what it all comes down to is that the Parliament Funkadelic universe, which has spawned so many albums, side projects, one-offs, all kinds of stuff, including the aforementioned Eddie Hazel stuff. Basically, these are all bands that have been collaborative or worked with George Clinton. George Clinton is the tie that binds. Earlier on, they went under the name Funkadelic. This is when you're going to see this, and then later on they kind of went as Parliament, and then they became known as Parliament Funkadelic, and it's just like sort of a little bit confusing. But the thing to know is that it's all George Clinton.
Yeah. There's a really good documentary on Amazon, I believe, about like kind of how they got started out and like what Parliament was versus what Funkadelic was, and how they all worked with George Clinton and that whole thing. So I highly recommend that.
Interesting. I'll have to check that out. This is the Four Men with Beards pressing. This particular pressing was knocked pretty widely as a low quality pressing, although my version of this is fine.
I have the same thing and it sounds fine.
I
wonder what the other.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the original pressing sounds like. I'm still looking for my original pressing of Matt.
Yeah, they're not cheap, and I found them very expensive and beat up at the same time.
Beat up,
which is
that's
unfortunate.
Yeah, if I'm gonna spend that kind of money on a record, I want it to be in good condition. But anyway, I have no issues with my version of this. This record is best known for the face-melting guitar solo on the title track, also performed by Eddie Hazel. But more so, it's a blending of funk and psychedelia in a way that had never been attempted. It's a listening experience that is unforgettable. It's been described as, and I quote, one of the loudest, darkest, and most intense records ever made.
Wow.
I think that's
a bold claim.
It's a bold claim, but it's a fairly fair assessment when you're talking about the time period and when it came out, and just how prolific this is as a record in the world of funk. And again, I'm talking about things that have been influential to me. So I love this record. I think it's fantastic. It's certainly worth your attention.
I have it in my collection too. It's outstanding.
The other side of that is the more modern stuff when you get into Parliament. This is Mothership Connection. It is the fourth from the Parliament lineup and features both Maceo Parker and Fred Wesley from James Brown's horn section. So,
yeah, those guys.
He fired them. Why would you fire those guys? They were really, really good. It has like sort of a loose outer space theme. And introduces George Clinton's alien alter ego, Starchild, for the first time. Give Up the Funk, Tear the Roof Off the Sucker remains as an anthem of funk nearly 50 years after its release. I mean, this is a classic album for sure. It's worth having.
Now, have you seen some of the video of the concerts that go along with this? The outlandish craziness of the stage, and there was like tons of people up on stage doing different things. They had a giant mock-up of the spaceship where they would come out of it, and it was
insane.
Wow.
I have seen George Clinton live when I was in college, so it's been about 20 years since then. And again, he would have 15 people up on stage with him, and it was very much a collaboration. But if you are getting into funk or you're getting into sort of the roots of funk, look up George Clinton. I mean, the guy has a crazy long career, and you think about what he did with Bernie Worrell and some of the other people that he's played with. I mean, my God, just amazing foundations of funk. And we talked about that a little bit, about some of these different bands kind of being, foundational bands in funk. And I think that a lot of these records that I've pulled up could certainly fall into that category. And certainly this last record that I'm going to bring up will. Sly and the Family Stone, There's a Riot Going On, also known simply as Riot. This was, again, a dark shift from previous recordings that was made at a time of internal tension and heavy drug use within the band. And so there was all kinds of inner sort of strife going on with the band, yet they still put out this sort of amazing record, and you have songs like Family Affair juxtapose the entire theme of the album, which is about civil rights and sort of the torch being handed off to the Black Power movement. And there's all kinds of themes that are going on within this record that I think deserve your attention and sort of a deeper look. Again, I found this list to be ridiculously hard to do because
There's so much.
I have about 700 plus funk, soul, disco records, and a good chunk of that is just heavy funk. And I always tell people there's a fine, thin, razor thin line between funk and disco, and it was inescapable. When you have bands like the Grateful Dead and the Rolling Stones literally putting out disco tracks in the late 70s, you know that it was unescapable. So if you were already an R&B artist, you're going to throw a few disco tracks in there.
You're going to do it.
So it's going to happen. So long story short, I actually really enjoy the disco, and we've done whole disco spins, you know what I mean? And I think that, when you're getting into the funk, there's so many different things to mention, and I will mention probably one of the funkiest albums that's not on this list, and it's simply not on this list because I don't own it, and it's James Brown's The Payback.
Yep.
It's hard to find. I've come across it a few times, and it's been like a roached version. So if anybody has a copy of James Brown's The Payback, send that to me. But that is probably one of the funkiest albums ever made, and would definitely be at the top of this list and many other lists as well. So I just wanted to kind of talk about some of my albums that I'm passionate about, the funk stuff, and again, this is not go out and buy these records. This is what's been really awesome for me, and hopefully it could be awesome for some of you too. Until next time.
Thanks.
Tranquilo. Shine.